Story.
Hi there, I'm Roux. Welcome to my video. And welcome to yet another week of the apocalypse. To take your mind off of things, I've decided to go back to the basics and revisit some neckbeards. With these scrumptious neckbeard stories, Choker Neckbeard, Edward Fuller, Subpar Substitute, Give Me Thy Soul, and The Shoe Collector. I just want to take some time to thank the most important people of society today during this horrible crisis. The people who clean up at hospitals, y'all are heroes. If it weren't for the people who clean, we couldn't be taking care of that many people. Think about that. They're invaluable, and they don't get enough praise. Also, the people who work with food and who grows the food we eat, and the people who work with electricity, making sure we have lights on, making sure we have electricity during this time, and the people who work in sanitation, making sure that we have water and that everything works. Heroes! Thank you so much for your hard work. You're awesome. Without further ado, though, let's get started. Choker Neckbeard. Neckbeard put a leash on my choker and wanted me to go with him. So, a few years ago, when I was still cosplaying and going to conventions, I went to a little convention with my boyfriend at the time. I was cosplaying some fallen angel demon thing, and I was wearing a choker. So, we were walking around when suddenly a big dude with a fedora on, the biggest neckbeard I've ever seen, and the most disgusting smell I have ever known, walked up to us, put his hands on my choker, and put a leash he had on it. Turned around and dragged me with him. I grabbed the arm of my boyfriend, who tried to stop him, but he just walked and walked, until some friends stood before him. My boyfriend freed me from his leash, but the neckbeard grabbed my arm and said, "No, she is my waifu. I can't let her go. I must protect her from all the dangers that exists in the darkness of this world." My boyfriend just screamed at him that he was my boyfriend and tried to pull me away from him, but he wouldn't let me go. Until security shows up and grabs him and pulls me away from him. He just screamed like a pig and said he needed to protect his lowly angel. I never saw him again, and I stopped going to conventions. That's so aggravating that this neckbeard dude literally ruined her love for cosplaying and going to conventions. What an entitled fuckwit. I also feel like it stems from really questionable animes with some disturbing plot lines where if you kidnap a girl, she's just gonna love you forever, and it's completely a-okay if you just grab her and take her with you. Alarming. Edward Fuller. My 300-pound neckbeard vampire life. Long post, but I just found this sub and wanted to share my best neckbeard tale. This happened back when I was in high school, and we had a vampire pack, as they call themselves, of neckbeard vampires at my high school. I don't mean they just dressed decked out in the tackiest Hot Topic ensemble they could find either. They full-on tried to convince people they were real vampires, up to and including fucking hissing at people they were mad at. For a group that bragged on and on about how different they were among a flock of sheep, they looked like they came from the same cookie cutter with patchy beards, unwashed hair, trench coats, fedoras, and those real ugly baggy trip pants with all the chains. Even the single female neckbeard vampire dressed like them. All of them claimed to have abandoned their mortal names and insisted that they be called edgy names, like Chaos, Destruction, and my favorite, Shadow Wayne. They'd legit even argue with teachers who'd call them their real names, like Steve. Whenever you called them out for being able to stand in sunlight or show up in pictures, they would say some dumb shit like, "That's just anti-vampire propaganda pushed by the church and Hollywood." The worst was how disruptive they were in class. They would answer every question with some goofy-ass dark answer that had nothing to do with the question and sounded like it came from Jared Leto's junior high poetry journal. At one point, the female neckbeard decided that she had a crush on me and wasn't going to take no for an answer. I'm talking going as far as just showing up at my house and sitting on my porch waiting for me to come outside and leaving creepy little deviant fantasy-filled love letters on my locker. You want to know how I finally got rid of her? I had to play their game and make up some elaborate lie about coming from a long line of vampire hunters. I was just being a smartass, figuring she'd realize I was just mocking her. But they were so deep into their delusion that she acted like it was real, even handing me a sad note the next day about how crushed she was, that destiny had forced us apart. I'd be lying if I said I didn't have the tiniest bullying streak when I was a teen, but I couldn't help myself around these sort of people. I hung out with the actual punk and goth kids, so you can imagine how many of my female friends got harassed by Nos for Dipshit and co. I once brought a spray bottle to school filled with holy water I got from the local church, and went around lightly spritzing them since it was likely the only shower they had had that week, only to be met with the previously mentioned hissing. My favorite interaction was the time I got to class early and left a crucifix and garlic on one of their desks. When they waddled in and saw it, they were furious and instantly screamed at the teacher about it. The teacher dragged us outside, and the interaction went like this. Teacher: OP, what's going on? Vamp says you're harassing them. Vamp: yeah, he's insulting my beliefs. Teacher: now, OP, you know we don't tolerate that kind of thing here. Me: what, that he believes he's a vampire? Teacher: come on, OP, he doesn't Vamp: believe? No, I am a vampire. The teacher just stopped dead with an exhausted look on her face. Looked at the fat vamp for a minute, looked at me, and then back at the vamp again before going, you know what? Just keep separated from each other. Eventually, that kid got expelled for writing a big revenge manifesto on MySpace with a bunch of kids' names on it, including yours truly. Wow. I just want to say that I'm not mocking people for being heavy or like anything like that. I just thought it would be funny, like Edward Cullen, but fuller. Yeah, that's crazy. It reminds me of a documentary I saw where people were like convinced that they were vampires and they kept drinking each other's blood. Yeah. Imagine if Twilight was just that guy breaking into Bella Swan's house. It's already creepy, holy shit. Just some guy breaking into a girl's house to watch her sleep. Like, how is that not rapey, as so eloquently put by Dean in Supernatural? Subpar substitute. Local Neckbeard lands substitute teaching job. Hilarity ensues. This is a tale of the late 90s, early 2000s equivalent of a neckbeard, whatever that may be. Our 8th grade history teacher was on maternity leave and told us that this was her last week and next week we would have a sub. All she knew was that the sub was fresh out of college. The next week, the front of our room is occupied by a corpulent man, sporting a trench coat over his plaid button-down and basketball shorts. Our school had a dress code, so this was somewhat surprising. For that day, class continued as usual. We were instructed by Mr. Chesterton, not his real name, but it fits, in the finer points of the Battle of Shiloh, interrupted only by Chesterton belching a few times, and some dumbass throwing a pencil at the Trilby hat on the coat hook. The next day, Mr. Chesterton announced that he did not feel that the Civil War was important, and proceeded to spend a few days discussing Nazi Germany for no reason in particular. After a few days of ridicule, he ditched the trench coat, but the shirt and shorts stayed. He wore the same shorts multiple days in a row, and their appearance led some to believe that they doubled as sleepwear. 2 weeks into his tenure, Mr. Chesterton's attention was consumed by the foul beast known as Final Fantasy IX. One Monday, Chesterton was seen bringing a PlayStation 1 into the classroom and hooking it up to his computer monitor. He gave us a study hall and spent the class playing Final Fantasy. He got told off by admin that afternoon, after somebody complained. And the next morning, he grumpily resumed his history of the Third Reich. A few people expressed concern that the impromptu German history lesson was lasting so long, and the plump Chesterton responded eloquently, "I don't know jack shit about the Civil War, and I'm not about to go doing some reading. I majored in physical education." He sure didn't look the part. We spent the rest of Mr. Chesterton's time learning more about World War II history, and Mr. Chesterton spent most of his time attempting to make eye contact with some girls. One day, a student, basically a late 90s Chad, who cared little for anything other than hockey and girls, threatened to "put your lights out, fatso." And Mr. Chesterton brought a gun to school the next day. He said he had better ones at home. This didn't surprise many of us, as Mr. Chesterton was often seen to use a Swiss Army knife to open his microwave popcorn during free periods. On his last day, he made everyone popcorn and put on some crappy movie while he did something on a bright yellow Game Boy and stared hungrily at the girl closest to him. During his time at the school, Chesterton had garnered a reputation as something of a creep, and a few students claimed that he had spent his free periods viewing pornography on his school-issued Apple computer. He left us that day with a tip of his hat and a reminder to pursue academic success, as I have. The next day, our regular teacher came in and gave us a Civil War quiz. When that went predictably bad, we regaled her with the tales of Mr. Chesterton's fascination with fascist Germany and young girls. Mr. Chesterton, who was scheduled to stay on as a sub and teach PE in the interim, was promptly removed from the school. The last anyone saw of him was his obese figure hunched over his Honda, trying to get it to start and cursing wildly. Yeah, when someone has like an overly obsessive thing about World War II and Nazis and kind of make it sound like they're a little bit in awe of them, that's always concerning. "Give me thy soul." He threatened to steal my soul. This is a story about a guy that I used to work with about 20 to 18 years ago and whom another friend of mine temporarily lived with. Let's call him Barry and my friend Leon. I used to work for a company that took calls from people who needed utilities marked for digging. I met some truly interesting people there, one of whom was named Barry. Barry was a white guy in his early 20s and a little pudgy. He and I sort of bonded since we both liked some of the same things, such as fantasy, sci-fi, computer, and video games, and so on. Typical nerd fare. We got on well enough to where we eventually started hanging out a few times outside of work. I discovered that he was dating one of my old friends from high school, Mary, whom I hadn't seen since then. It was a note in his favor because she was awesome. However, as time went by, I began to notice more and more off-putting things about him. He was really, really obsessed with fantasy and role-playing games, to the point where he was obnoxious. Barry liked to write, and his characters were always overpowered, to the point where it was completely ridiculous. During this time, Mary introduced him to Leon and some other mutual friends, who held a Dungeons & Dragons group 1 to 3 times a month. He was invited to play, but was eventually uninvited, because he tried to pull his overpowered crap there as well. The group would find themselves in a jam, and his character would suddenly reveal himself to be an all-powerful, godlike dragon who could easily wipe the floor with whatever they were battling. He'd also try to cheat on his rolls. Both of these were huge no-nos, and he was told that he needed to either clean up his act or find a new group. He would occasionally clean up his act, but would revert back so frequently that he was inevitably kicked from the group. It didn't help that he had this really arrogant, know-it-all demeanor when he was talking to people in general. So, meanwhile, I'm still working with this guy, who would go off on these tangents about the group, his characters, and his obsessions about very bloody and gory video games. He spent at least an hour once talking about the 80s video game Chiller, as he'd found an emulator for it. I was mildly interested, since I didn't know that a game like that existed. But I wasn't interested enough to really want to play it. There was just something about a game where you tortured helpless people that didn't sit right with me. I knew it was just a game and all, but this guy was really into it. It was making the people around us pretty uncomfortable as well. He eventually drifted off to do actual work stuff. We still talked at work, but I didn't really hang out with him outside of work anymore. One day, we had break at the same time, and he was telling me about his swords. I was into stuff like that back in the day, so he offered to let me see them as he had them in his car. I told him that it wasn't a great idea to keep those in the car while he was at work, but he hand-waved my concern away. Once out in the parking lot, I admired the swords, and he started talking about how he was planning on putting human souls into them. He then joked about stealing mine and putting it into the sword. I joked back that it wasn't available, but he basically said he would steal it by force if he had to, which was kind of creepy, but I chalked it up to a joke. Barry wasn't really the most socially intelligent person. We went back inside, and I repeated that work didn't want us to have weapons on site, as it was in the manual. Again, he hand-waved it away. I can't remember how much longer it was down the line, but eventually he got fired from work and escorted out by security. Why, you ask? Because he got into a verbal tiff with a female manager, and when her back was turned, told one of his co-workers that he wanted to cut her a new smile with his swords, which he had in his car. They searched his car, and sure enough, there were the swords. Barry wasn't arrested, but this definitely kept him from finding gainful employment for a while. I think he was also in the National Guard, so they kicked him out as well. He also broke up with his girlfriend, who wised up to the fact that she easily deserved better, since apparently he wasn't that great with her either. About a year later, I discovered that he had moved in with my friend Leon, who had long since wanted to move out of his family's place. His family was great, but he just wanted to be independent. He soon discovered that Barry was a terrible roommate, as he never picked up after himself, never really showered, and was perpetually late on his share of rent and utilities. He'd also put on a little weight and would always walk around in dirty, greasy sweatpants. Oh, and then there was all of his porn that he'd leave out, which ranged from normal stuff to gay furry porn that he would always claim that he had as a joke. Everyone said that there wouldn't be anything wrong with him being a gay furry, he just needed to be honest with himself and stop being such a creeper. Leon honestly put up with more of it than he should have, but what finally did it was how Barry treated Leon's female guests. He would always creepily hit on them and try to get fairly close, despite it being very clear that they wanted nothing to do with him and that they weren't there for him. He eventually tried saying that he was the master of all I see, and I'm seeing you right now, to one of them, which was the final straw. Leon moved back in with his family, and Barry had to move back in with his. I think that there was a little bit more to how that ended, but for the life of me I can't remember it. Since all of the last paragraph, I was told secondhand by Leon. I know that there were more that he never mentioned, mostly because he wanted to block it out of his mind. Again, with the possessive thing, like, oh, I can just kidnap a girl and she's mine, property. Or, oh, I see you with my eyeballs, you are now mine. I don't understand how they think that that's actually gonna work on anyone. Just living in their own delusional little world. The shoe collector. I should have never trusted a neckbeard. So, my second semester of freshman year, I had to move to a new school. I knew 2 people from that school because of youth group, and they were really nice and showed me around campus. I really like art, so I told my counselor I would like to have pottery class. She gave me pottery class as my second period and weightlifting for my other elective. I'm not really an extroverted person. Mostly I would go to the library and listen to music or read. My mom told me because I moved to a new school that I should try even finding one friend in every class. I was very shy at first, but I warmed up to some of my classmates, who had same interests as me, like painting, drama, anime, reading, and slam poetry. In my pottery class, there was this neckbeard, sitting in front of me. He was about 6'2", chubby, had a very foul smell, and very greasy hair. I couldn't stand his stench at first, but as time goes by, I got used to it. At first, he didn't really talk to me. He would just stare at me sometimes. One day, my teacher paired us up for a project, and that's when he started talking to me. He would ask me what animes I watch, what I do after school, and what kind of drawings I do. It was just normal questions a person would ask when they meet someone new, so I didn't have any problems on answering them. As we spent more time with the project, his questions would increasingly be more personal, and that's when I started distancing myself from him and talking as little as possible. Our projects got finished and we got a decent grade on it. I also promised myself I would never work with him again. By the next month, I've gained friends in that class. 2 of them were a couple, and they were both seniors. They sat next to the Neckbeard and sat across from me. The couple one time caught Neckbeard secretly taking pictures of me and told him to delete it. He would also always comment about my shoes. He would say his sister would really like a pair of my shoes and how she doesn't have one because they're so poor. Even though one time I heard him bragging to his friends about buying a katana. So anyways, I felt really bad because it reminded me of what it was like back home in the Philippines. So the next day I gave him a pair of shoes and I was really happy that I helped his sister. When that class ended, we never really talked after. Fast forward to senior year. I have Neckbeard in my weightlifting class, and he would always make comments about how the girls dress, or how he can lift better than everyone else. I just got annoyed by him, so I frequently avoid him in class. At lunch, my friend, let's call her Sarah, started talking about Neckbeard, and how his friend told her that he asks girls for shoes because he has a foot fetish. I also figured out through his cousin, that was a grade lower than us, that he didn't have any siblings. He's an only child. I just felt sick. After knowing that, I changed my weightlifting class because I couldn't even look at him without imagining him with my shoes. Ew. I'm just imagining him with all of the pictures he wasn't caught taking, that he probably took of her feet, that he probably fantasizes with while he does whatever he does to her shoes. Gross. That's it for this time. I hope you had a fabulous time and that it took your mind off things. And that you'll want to come back next Friday and subscribe and whatnot. Soon I'll post every Wednesday too. So I post every Friday and soon every Wednesday too. Feel free to follow me on my social medias. I've just added my TikTok. Links in the description. Thank you so much to my wonderful patrons, Katbra, Magdalena Vodska, Cami, and Ellie. Everybody, stay safe, stay awesome, stay the fuck home. See you next time.